The worst pandemics in the history of mankind. Throughout history, disease, plagues, and pandemics have been some of humanity's biggest threats. It's easy to lose sight of exactly how horrible these national and international disasters were when people throw off numbers and statistics about past major outbreaks. Today, we'll look at 10 of history's most terrifying epidemics and pandemics, and we'll tell you how catastrophic each one was. By the end of this video, you'll realize how much worse they all are from the ongoing pandemic, so stay home and keep watching. Starting with number 10. Yellow fever. 1694 to 1878. Some of you may have forgotten about yellow fever, but it was one of the world's most feared diseases from the 1600s until the early 1900s, despite doctors estimating the illness to be over 3,000 years old. The World Health Organization describes it as an acute viral hemorrhagic disease spread by mosquito bites. The disease's primary symptoms include headache, fever, nausea, vomiting, exhaustion, muscle pain, and jaundice, which gives the condition its name, due to the somewhat yellow color it often gives the skin of those who contract it. Yellow fever is a serious illness that should not be taken lightly. Those with severe symptoms usually result in death within a week to 10 days. The disease spread rapidly over the Caribbean and several countries in the Americas, including the United States. The yellow fever epidemics that devoured Boston, Philadelphia, and Norfolk, Virginia from 1694 through 1855 were devastating. The outbreaks in the Mississippi River Valley in 1878, however, were the deadliest of all. Around 120,000 persons were diagnosed with yellow fever in the spring and summer of that year, with 13,000 to 20,000 of those affected dying from the illness. Because the disease is spread by mosquitoes, it can spread easily from a single affected individual to a whole population in a hotter tropical environment. Fortunately, scientists have since produced a highly efficient vaccine against the disease that is both inexpensive and widely available. But this hasn't stopped cases from sprouting up in Africa, Asia, and South America on an occasional basis. Number 9. Japanese smallpox epidemic. 735 to 737. With the devastating Japanese smallpox epidemic of the 700s, things really took a turn for the worst. And this isn't the last time smallpox is featured on this list. That's because it's a variola major virus that causes an exceedingly contagious and severe sickness. Smallpox induces fever, vomiting, and infectious sores and scabbing all over the body, which can spread the virus through touching, as well as leaking blisters on the tongue and in the throat, which can spread the virus through coughing droplets in the air. At its most severe, smallpox has a mortality rate of up to 30%. We turn to Japan in the 8th century, beginning in the northern Kyushu region in 735, for an illustration of this genuinely terrifying fatality rate in action. It's estimated that up to 1 million people died by the time the virus outbreak peaked in 737. The frequency and intensity with which smallpox outbreaks occurred in Japan left a permanent cultural scar on Japanese tradition, with the idea that the disease was brought about by a demonic force because something so terrible had to be otherworldly in nature. Number 8. Hong Kong flu. 1968 to 1970. Going back to an old classic, the flu, specifically the H3N2 strain, often known as the Hong Kong flu, was the third influenza pandemic to strike in the 20th century. Because it's one of the more persistent and adaptive viruses out there, flus and varieties of the flu are frequently seen in massive international pandemics. Antigenic drift is a phenomenon that occurs in many flu strains, including the Hong Kong flu. A quick biology lesson. It's difficult to become infected with the same viral strain twice, because the body's immune system recognizes the virus and produces the appropriate antibodies to resist it. But when a virus undergoes antigenic drift, it's basically putting on a disguise that enables it to launch a surprise attack on the body before your immune system realizes what's going on. That was certainly the case for those infected with the Hong Kong flu, which is thought to have developed from a 1957 strain. In its 2 years of peak activity, the disease is believed to have killed between 1 and 4 million people globally. The majority of them were over the age of 60. Number 7. The Antonine Plague. 165 to 180. Next, the Plague of Galen, a historical plague so deadly that it is thought to have contributed to the fall of the famous Roman Empire. This unknown illness is said to have been brought back to the Roman Empire by soldiers who served in East Asia, and was named after the Greek physician who first discovered it. The disease originally appeared in Asia Minor, then moved to Greece, and finally to Italy, where it quickly spread in heavily populated urban cities, like Rome, claiming as many as 2,000 lives per day at its peak. Nobody could comprehend, much less battle, the plague. Two of the empire's rulers, Lucius Verus and Marcus Aurelius, are said to have died as a result of the disease. The overall death toll is estimated to be between 7% and 10% of the Roman Empire, with some estimates as high as 15%. It has also spread to other European nations like Spain, and even into Egypt and South Africa. What was this mysterious illness supposed to be? Scholars believe it was most likely a smallpox outbreak, based on records of symptoms at the time. We told you. Smallpox is back at it again. Number 6. The Third Plague. 1855. In a handful of horrible categories, the Third Plague set new records. It was not only the first incidence of bubonic plague to affect all 5 main continents, with large outbreaks in Hong Kong in 1894, Bombay in 1896, Sydney in 1900, Cape Town in 1901, and Los Angeles in 1924, but it also lasted over 100 years, from 1855 to 1959. During its reign of terror, it claimed the lives of about 12 million people, ravaging communities all over the world and spurring containment measures, unlike anything the world had ever seen, with different degrees of success. The affected areas launched a strong defense against the invading sickness, after learning about the virus's dissemination through fleas and rats, as well as its early warning signs and symptoms. Doctors began experimenting with plague serums around the end of the 19th century, but they often killed as many individuals as they cured. Other measures used to contain the spread include large quarantines and controlled rodent burning. Many of these measures were ultimately ineffective, but they did set an example for the scale of global response to a massive viral pandemic. Number 5. HIV/AIDS. 1981 to present. The human immunodeficiency virus, or HIV, and the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or AIDS, that can develop from it if left untreated, are two of the most well-known sexually transmitted diseases of all time. The disease is transmitted through sexual contact with bodily fluids, needle sharing, and improper blood transfusions. If remain untreated, the condition can cause infected persons to become severely immunocompromised, which can result in death from another health complication that the body is no longer able to handle. The current HIV/AIDS epidemic initially surfaced in 1981 and has persisted to this day. There are now roughly 37.7 million individuals living with HIV/AIDS, and the virus has killed over 25 million people since its discovery. The government's inadequate approach to limiting the outbreak and effectively treating affected individuals is what makes the HIV/AIDS epidemic particularly appalling. The instructions Washington gave the Center for Disease Control in tackling the outbreak showed the attitude regarding the virus, with the gist of their advice being to simply look presentable, but do as little as possible. In conclusion, millions of deaths caused by HIV/AIDS could have been avoided if the right treatments had been provided. Many patients infected with HIV/AIDS, particularly in the early years, were LGBT, African American, poor, or drug users. This is frequently cited as the primary cause for the government's lack of response to the epidemic. Fortunately, research into HIV/AIDS has pioneered treatments in the past few decades that allow individuals to survive long and comfortable lives, despite their disease. Number 4. Plague of Justinian. 541 to 542. It's now time for a pandemic of mythical scale. The true magnitude of the Plague of Justinian has been questioned in recent years. However, several historical records place the death toll of the plague at 25 and 50 million people, or around 10% of the world's population at the time. This was most likely another case of exceedingly deadly bubonic plague, transmitted by rats and their fleas, through the Byzantine Empire in the 6th century, similar to the more recent Third Plague we discussed before. Like most major outbreaks of the bubonic plague, the Justinian plague likely originated in Asia, but infected rats were unknowingly brought into African nations like Egypt through Roman trade routes. Cases spread rapidly across the cosmopolitan empire, bringing death and destruction everywhere it went. You're probably beginning to get the idea behind the old saying, "Avoid it like the plague," after hearing enough of these instances. Number 3. Spanish flu. 1918 to 1919. The last 3 infectious epidemics on this list are among the deadliest in human history. Beginning with the most devastating case of influenza in history, the Spanish flu of 1918, which wreaked havoc on the post-World War I world, killing an estimated 40 to 50 million people worldwide. The disease is thought to have started with military members returning from battlegrounds of war, who then spread the sickness to civilians, infecting 1/3 of the world's population. This flu, like many others, was highly fatal to the young and elderly. However, the fact that the Spanish flu had an extraordinarily high fatality rate among healthy young people, aged approximately 25, added to the horror of the disease. Because there were no effective flu vaccines available at the time, the Spanish flu swept across the globe like the Grim Reaper, killing tens of millions of people. Number 2. Smallpox. 1520. Smallpox is now back for the last time, for the one and only instance in recorded history, when a virus was involved in a man-made genocide on several occasions. Smallpox was one of the most serious threats to human existence, until it was finally eradicated via treatment and the invention of vaccines. The virus is estimated to have killed about 500,000 people a year in Europe throughout the 1800s. It is said that Native Americans were killed in the late 1700s, after being fooled into accepting smallpox-infected blankets by the British and Americans, accounting for nearly 90% of the native population killed at the time. This case in point from 1520 shows that smallpox brought into South America by Spanish conquistadors may have been the Aztecs' final nail in the coffin. The disease crept inward after the Spanish introduced it to the Aztec coastal territories in the mid to late 1510s, until it hit the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan in 1520. The Aztec civilization perished a year later, after 56 million dead, leaving the land that would later become New Mexico, available for grabs. And you can be sure the conquistadors took it, stomping over millions of Aztec bodies in the process. Today, courtesy to anti-vax overprivileged first world soccer moms, the disease is making a global comeback tour. And lastly, number 1. The bubonic plague. Also known as the Black Death. 1347 to 1351. You can say we saved the worst for last. Regarding the 14th century's Black Death, you're considered lucky if you died quickly. The unfortunate ones survived long enough to witness society crumble around them, as their bodies erupted in big oozing buboes that gave the disease its name, before succumbing to the agonizing illness and misery. The Black Death wiped a third or half, according to some estimates, of Europe's population. During the 4-year span when this disease was most prevalent, it killed nearly 200 million people, after being introduced into continental Europe by stowaway rats, bringing their own infected stowaway fleas on commercial ships. The Black Death wreaked such havoc on Europe that it took almost 200 years for the continent to recover its pre-plague population. It also left its mark as one of history's worst disasters, killing almost twice as many people as World Wars I and II combined. So remember to wash your hands and avoid kissing any rats you come across. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video. Don't forget to give us a like and share this video with your friends. If you're staying indoors at this time, you're doing the right thing. Don't worry. We've got plenty more viral videos to keep you occupied. Simply click subscribe and the notification bell so you don't miss out. Keep yourself safe and healthy.